Well, I tried very hard to bring us up to date with today's, all the way up to today's bona fide crisis that is right up here with all the other ones. And I couldn't do it. I mean, it was just, there was just too much stuff to cover. So we're stuck, with one more crisis being resolved, and without getting into right now, today, the one that we're in. But I will say this, and this was the way I had planned my last class, was I was going to draw actually parallels as we discuss the current crisis with all the other 7 crises that we've talked about. This is like crisis 6, this is like crisis 5, boom, boom, boom. But not being able to do that, you're going to have to connect the dots yourselves, okay? But I know you can do it because it reminds me of the old funny movie, The Freshman, starring Marlon Brando, okay, where the freshman comes to NYU, and he gets involved accidentally with mobsters, and they want him to drive a car, just make a short drive into New Jersey, but they're going to pay him $500. And he said, I smell a rat. And then somebody started laughing. They said, he says, hey, Carmine, he says he smells a rat. And Carmine is played by Marlon Brando, reprising his Godfather role. He said, why do you smell, the other mobster says, why do you smell a rat, kid? And Carmine says, because God gave him brains, that's why. Okay. So if you've got, I know you all have brains or you wouldn't be here, okay? I know you all have faith or you wouldn't be here. So go ahead and use your brains, and if God grants us the grace to have another class or 2 or 3, we will go into it in some more detail. Today, though, we're going to talk about the roots of the current crisis. And over 130 years ago, St. John Bosco, who had a series of dreams, very prophetic dreams, had a dream where he saw the ship of Peter run by a man in white in a tremendous storm that looked like the whole thing was going to capsize. It's a complicated and elaborate dream. I'm just going to get to the gist of it. And he sees in the distance the 2 moorings that this ship could go to for safety, and ultimately does go to a great difficulty for safety. And one is the Blessed Sacrament. One of the moorings holds the Blessed Sacrament, and the other has Our Lady on top. And I think there's a lot to that. We're going to explore here the 7th crisis in the church. It doesn't count this one, which is the crisis of the 60s, the crisis following Vatican II and Humanae Vitae. So, one thing to remember, why is the church always in crisis? And I think we see in the Apocalypse the answer. In the chapter 12 of the Apocalypse, St. John sees a woman clothed with the sun, and on her head a crown of 12 stars. And she is about to give birth to a child, and while she's giving birth, the dragon is right there ready to devour that child. And that's kind of a symbol of the whole struggle of the church throughout the centuries. Here's the actual quote. And a great portent appeared in heaven, as I just mentioned. He might devour the child when she brought it forth. So as Christ is coming alive in the world, as Christ is there doing his salvific work, the other guy, the bad guy, is always going to be there to try to battle against it, to destroy it, to make it stillborn, to make it not work. And that's this eternal opposition. Why is the devil always going to oppose this? Because the male child is the one who will rule all the nations with a rod of iron. Jesus Christ is God. His way is the right way. Well, the crisis begins, with everything going pretty well for the church. Okay, the church has a very, very high prestige at the conclusion of World War II. For a lot of reasons. Here you see the Allied soldiers coming in to Rome itself, talking to the priests. Here's Pope Pius XII blessing the soldiers. He was an extremely popular pope at the time. Okay, with both inside the Catholic world and outside the Catholic world. He was another one of these guys at that time who was a lot like Pope Pius VII, was regarded at the time by Jewish people and Gentiles alike as being someone who was standing up strongly against tyranny, regarded as such in the pages of the New York Times and Time magazine and all kinds of things. What were the reasons for all this prestige at the time? Well, there were a lot of them. One, there was a great amount of heroism of clergy and religious in World War II. We're going to go over that in some detail. There was heroism of Catholic laity during World War II, and a lot of it. There was a great deal of persecution of the church by totalitarians, both brown totalitarians, black totalitarians, meaning the Italian fascists, they wore black was their color, and by the red totalitarians, the communists. And there was a great deal of inspiration which the Catholic faith gave to a lot of people who did heroic deeds. And it was thought to be a real positive motor for things positive and good. And gigantic relief efforts that the church was involved with everywhere. We're going to talk about these quite a bit. And then the resistance that the church became a symbol of to the Iron Curtain as it descended on Europe worldwide. Let's go through them one by one. Heroism of Catholic laity in World War II. There was a lot of, very high percentage of Catholics in the military, particularly in the U.S. and British military. It's estimated, like for example, the Marine Corps, as many as 40% in World War II of the people were Catholics. Very high level of religious practice at the time. Catholics at the time, about 80% of American Catholics went to Mass every Sunday. Elsewhere in the world, it was a pretty high percentage too, not as high as it was in the United States, but a lot higher than it is now. And the resistance fighters, people who were actually fighting against the occupying forces, happened to be usually were either Catholics or commies. Okay, they were, and that's an interesting story there. Sometimes they worked together, sometimes they worked against each other. But anyway, the Catholics had a high percentage in the resistance. The Cross of Lorraine, the Fighting French, dominated by Catholics. I mean, their symbol was the Catholic symbol of the Cross of Lorraine. De Gaulle is a good representative of them, and others, the writer George Bernanos and others. And even in Germany, the guys that tried to pull off the plot to kill Hitler, in early 1945, were in 1944, the White Rose movement and the Nazi resistance were overwhelmingly Catholic. There was also a great deal, that was the laity now. We haven't even gotten to the clergy and religious. Now we'll look at that. The famous Monsignor Hugh O'Flaherty, decorated by 7 different governments. Medals. We went to his house when we were in Ireland, and we saw the medals gathering dust on his nightstand in the little town where he ended up dying. But anyway, decorated by all kinds of governments for the relief work, secret work he did, helping Allied soldiers and helping Jewish people and other persecuted people escape from the Nazis. The convents around the world had apparently received, that we now know, orally only, a directive to harbor the persecuted people. The convents were full of Jewish people dressed up like priests and nuns and dressed up in other disguises. It was the Underground Railroad to get people out of the Nazi, get Jews to safety, was to go to convents and monasteries and get out that way. There was a great deal of clandestine Episcopal bishops that were assisting Jews in the war, even in Germany. It's a little known story, but it's a very important one. And the chaplains courageous. There were a great number, especially in the U.S. and Britain, and also in the Fighting French, and also the Polish Free Army. Heroic chaplains who gave their lives and gave everything they had to the troops. Some of them were given the Congressional Medal of Honor. The highest decorated amount of detachment of people during World War II were chaplains, and the highest number of chaplains, highest percent, were Catholic chaplains. So the church had a tremendous reputation because of the good example of clergy. There was a great deal of persecution to the church by totalitarians. High numbers of priests were sentenced to Dachau. Lots of them. Polish priests, if you were a dynamic Polish priest, you were going to the camp, you're going to Auschwitz, like St. Maximilian Kolbe. On the other end of Europe, on the eastern end, a great deal of liquidation of churches and clergy by the communists, particularly after World War II. And one country after another saw the church liquidated or severely persecuted. And Ukraine's story is famous. It's got a story. I could give a class on that in itself. Lithuania, also famous. All kinds of deportations of people, particularly of priests, sent to the camps. Poland, particularly in the early stages, Cardinal Wyszynski and others went to jail. Hungary, Cardinal Mindszenty was worldwide famous because he stood up both to the Nazis and to the communists. Czechoslovakia, Cardinal Baran. Albania, they tried to first break the church away from Rome, and then they threw anybody that wasn't going to play ball into jail. Later on, in the 60s, they demolished all churches, whether they were collaborating or not. And China has a very interesting history with this. China had a great deal of missionary conversions to Catholicism, and after the communist victory in the Chinese Civil War, the effort was made to close down the communication and the linkage between the Chinese Catholic Church and Rome. This is a particularly severe persecution in China. Here's like a little example of, the church is full, okay, with Chinese people taking on to Catholicism. And here's some of the same people after the communist takeover, put on a display and doing public penance and humiliation for their imperialist allegiance to the See of Rome. This, if you can see this closely, this was a Catholic church, okay? After the communist takeover, instead of Christ on the top, okay, they got a picture of Mao Zedong and, communist slogans all along, and that was an example of the kind of liberation of the church that was going on in the communist countries. Now, at the same time, there was a great deal of inspiration done by the Catholic faith, motorizing people and getting them brave. This is a picture of Malta. Whoops, let's go back. Of Malta. It's showing look at it. Here's a church. This is a beautiful church, okay? The whole country is bombed. They were bombed for months and months and months on every day of the month. Consecutive bombings, several bombings a day. They'd bomb them into submission, bomb them into the Stone Age. But their heroism during what's called the Second Great Siege of Malta, which was largely inspired by the dynamic Catholic faith of the people on Malta, is really a story to know and a story to behold. I mean, it was so profound that the Maltese, despite they shared everything among each other, they had rosary prayers going on at all times. The King of England gave a medal to every single person living on Malta after the Brits and we, after the Allies won the war. And the Maltese people had a procession, practically everybody in the country participated in, to a shrine of Our Lady in Malta to thank them for saving the country from fascist tyranny. After the war, the worldwide relief efforts was absolutely amazing. In every country, the Catholic relief was there because we have this worldwide network, which is very important, and it gave all kinds of aid. The United States government, during the Marshall Plan, decided they didn't know how they were going to help war-torn Europe. They said, we don't have the boots on the ground to deliver the powdered milk and the food, shelter, and clothing that people need. How can we possibly do it? They could never get away with it now. Someone suggested, well, the Catholic Church is in all these countries. Why don't we work with the Catholic Church? So they did, and the Church actually, with the involvement of our own, an American, Fulton J. Sheen, did a great deal of relief effort, for the church, by the church throughout the entire world. And here are some of the Catholic relief people. This is actually a picture in Germany. After Germany had knocked down, we were helping them too. Now, the resistance to communism worldwide was famous. This is the famous Cardinal Wyszynski of Poland, thrown in jail by the communists, indomitable, never going to give up, okay? And speaking of someone like that, the famous Cardinal Mindszenty, okay? Mindszenty, as he was arrested a few days after Christmas, made the statement, "Any confession wrung from me will either be a lie or the result of human weakness." Well, they did, put a show trial on him. They did subject him to brainwashing. He did, he was out of his mind for a while. And you could see kind of the glassiness of his eyes. He, was found guilty of treason and sentenced first to death, but was commuted life imprisonment because they were afraid if they sentenced him to death, there would be too much of a demonstration. In jail, maybe they forget about him. But he was a symbol worldwide. Several different movies of different kinds were made about him. And meanwhile, the resistance to communism was, the more Catholic you were, the more resistant you were to communism. This is literally an underground church, still united with the Universal Catholic Church, saying Mass secretly in China. And similar things happened in Vietnam. In Vietnam, also, there was a great deal of migration of the Catholics from northern Vietnam to southern Vietnam to exercise their religious freedom. Now, what's going on? With all this prestige, it's a great time of building. It's a brick and mortar time, here especially in the United States and other free countries. We built all kinds of churches in the 40s and 50s, particularly in the early 60s. This is just a little picture of it. And another thing that was of great growth was the baby boom, okay? We were having kids, okay? And this is a small Catholic classroom over at the time, but they were loaded with kids. I remember my first grade classroom, there were 52 kids, and there was another one just like it next door to us. So it was, Catholics were having kids, and they were filling schools and learning their catechism. Catholics in American culture were famous. Here's a quote. You all know what this is. "Going my way. Bing Crosby and Barry Fitzgerald, two Catholics in real life playing two Catholic priests." Okay. Popular movie, won a number of Academy Awards. And on TV, prime time, beating out at once, both Milton Berle and Frank Sinatra, okay, Fulton Sheen, okay, giving sermons, okay, on the cover of Time magazine. So the church was riding high. And, okay, the piece de resistance, finally, okay, in 1960, we elect the first Catholic president, okay? I was born a Catholic, okay? John Kennedy, okay? And again, they didn't have the access to instant news that we have today. Catholics voted for him in disproportionate numbers, okay? Although there some, not all. But in any event, he was a symbol that Catholics had finally arrived. The Catholics were as American as anybody else. Poor Al Smith, running in 1928, had everything thrown at him that you could think of, true and false. It was almost like like some of the stuff we lived through recently. Now, also in 1958, this wonderful man gets elected Pope, Pope John the 23rd. An amazing man from a lot of perspectives. Heroic himself during World War II. One of these bishops I was telling you about that was secretly helping Jewish people escape from the clutches of the exterminators. And he, extremely positive personality. Serves because he had because he was such a people person. They assigned him to diplomatic posts in various parts of the world, including Bulgaria and Turkey. And there he began to, with some of his resistance and relief work, if you want to call it that, became in contact with other Christians and collaborated, especially Orthodox Christians, very well with them. Got to appreciate very much, particularly the spirituality of Eastern Christendom, and common sense peasant type guy that he was, said, hey, we agree with these guys and put a number on it. It's something in the 94% of everything, 98% of everything. We should not be separated. And he wanted, and the collaboration that he began, particularly in Orthodox countries in the Balkans, started him thinking about, what can we do to get people back together again? So when he's elected Pope, very early in the game, he surprises everybody. He says he wants to call an ecumenical council. And here's Here's a statement by someone that was involved in that ecumenical council. I want to read it to you. What is needed at the present time is a new enthusiasm, a new joy and serenity of mind in what? In the unreserved acceptance of all of the entire Christian faith without forfeiting that accuracy and precision in its presentation, which characterized the proceedings of the Council of Trent and the First Vatican Council. Now, who said this? John the 23rd. His opening address, when he's calling the council, when the council's there, they're meeting in Rome, they're wearing their red robes and all the regalia, okay? He's telling them, this is what the council is supposed to be. It's not going to be changing the teaching of the church. It's trying to, we want to make sure we've got it, but we want to make ways that people can buy it, okay, can understand what it is, understand it well. We need a new enthusiasm, not just, snapping knuckles with a ruler, okay. We want to get, creative ways to explain all the Christian faith as defined by the Council of Trent and the First Vatican Council. We heard what the Council of Trent was. That was the one that was defining, what Catholic doctrine was. He goes, new ways to spread Christ. He says, what is needed and what everyone imbued with a truly, what is needed and what everyone imbued with a truly Christian Catholic apostolic experience craves today is that this doctrine shall be more widely known, more deeply understood, and more penetrating in its effects on men's moral lives. He was worried, okay, because there had been a great deal of secularization going on. It started already, particularly in the industrial countries. People, and particularly in where more people of a Marxist mentality had penetrated. Okay, he said, "How are we going to get back the people?" Okay, well, we got to get back to them. We got to give them Catholic doctrine, but it's got to be more widely known, more deeply understood. Not just formulas that they don't understand. We got to explain the formulas to them so that they know and they can love it the way we do. And that's also from Pope John the 23rd, from his opening address. Now, explaining truths that never pass away. What is needed, and what does he call it? This certain and immutable doctrine to which the faithful owe obedience. Now, again, to hear the narrative today, you would think that Pope John didn't believe in doctrine at all. Okay, it's all up for grabs. Okay, it's all being and becoming. Okay. No. It was not that. Certain and immutable doctrine which the faithful, those who really believe in the whole Christian shtick, or the old obedience, but it's got to be studied afresh and reformulated in contemporary terms. For this deposit of faith, or truths, which are contained in our time-honored teaching, is one thing. But the manner in which these truths are set forth, I underline this, but this is his saying, not mine, with their meaning preserved intact, is something else. And that's, again, from Pope Saint John the 23rd himself. He had two goals for the council. One, make the world Christian in plain English. Okay. Two, love, pray for, and earn Christian unity as desired by Christ. Okay, and what did Christ call the Christian unity? Father, that all may be one as you and I are one. That's one. Okay, in the Holy Trinity, it's one God. Okay, it doesn't mean the Son is going off in one direction, the Holy Spirit is going off in the third direction. No. They're one. Okay, and this is the kind of unity we have, a real unity, not just an ersatz unity, not a paper unity. Well, Vatican II is called, and here's a picture of it. And there is the largest church in Christendom, largest church almost in the world. There's one in Africa that's actually bigger now by a few feet. This is the Council Fathers, the bishops of the world, meet as delegates to come to Second Vatican Council. It takes 3 years. After the first session of the council, Pope John the 23rd dies of cancer. Cardinal Montini is elected Pope Paul VI. He keeps the council going. He doesn't stop it. He keeps it going, and away they go. There becomes to be, a great deal of it gets a lot of notoriety, and this is something that's important in the press. There becomes to be, in every age, people getting carried away and going too far. Now, I'm just saying this simplistically. There's a lot more behind this than that. But there's a heavy media attention to it, and a misunderstanding. I mean, when somebody, like you take somebody from, say, I don't know, New Guinea, okay, and take him to a baseball game if he's never been there before, he doesn't know what he's seeing, okay, and he describes it in his own terms, and he may not be, describing it at all, okay? Well, that's a little bit of the media looking at now and then, okay, at the Catholic Church. I mean, they don't understand exactly what they're seeing. They know what they want to happen, so they describe it in ways that are not correct and have a great deal of misunderstanding. And there's factionalism that arises because the media tended then to highlight and favor those that wanted to make a great deal of change, not like John the 23rd was talking about, but change the entire vision and structure of the Catholic Church to accommodate a worldview that they were more used to. And they got some people that were really for that, okay, during the council, and then there were people that were very much against that and even reacting very strongly and fiercely against that. It created a factionalism that was very unfortunate. In fact, what happened with those that were, got involved with the enthusiasm of reimagining church, okay, was they flipped St. John the 23rd's goals right on their heads, okay. Instead of making the world Christian, the thought was, let's make Christianity conform to the world, okay. That is not the goal of Christ, nor is it the goal of the Gospels, okay, nor was it the goal of St. John the 23rd, okay. It was not the full unity of Christ with the Father, okay, that Jesus prayed for on the night before he died, but rather fleeing from Christ. Christ has some things that are kind of hard to take, or the church has some moral teachings that are kind of hard to take. For the sake of unity, so-called, okay, let's get away from that. Whoa! Okay, that's not the goal that we just read from John the 23rd. That's putting it upside down. We got to figure out ways to get people to love the teaching of the church, to understand it and follow it, because it's the recipe. Since it comes from God, it's the recipe for human happiness. Then, okay, after the 1965, the council ceases, and the enthusiasts run wild with it, okay. Changes that go way beyond the 16 documents of the council, way beyond any authorized changes by the Vatican congregations in charge with implementing the council, take over, and they become part of the intellectual establishment in a lot of places. At the same time, right around the same time that the council is coming to a close, the birth control pill is invented in the middle 1960s. And once that pill is invented, a great deal of international pressure, including by major worldwide agencies, takes place to foster, acceptance of the pill. And of course, one of the biggest, roadblocks that they had to it was the Catholic Church, because the doctrine of the Church, re-enunciated by Pope Pius XI in 1929, was that artificial birth control is immoral and not to be allowed. Now, if all of a sudden you say, let's throw that away, it's got ramifications for the entire theology of marriage. Marriage becomes an entirely different thing if you throw that, the historic and ancient teaching out. What do I mean? Because if you separate sex from its life-giving aspect, and you separate it also from marriage. Okay, if sex has a meaning just in itself of togetherness and bonding and whatever it is, you no longer need it. The linkage between that and marriage has become very attenuated. With the pill, people realized this at the time, because even up until the Lambeth Conference of 29 of the Church of England, which was the first Christian denomination to countenance acceptance of birth control, there was a unity of Christians everywhere from Holland, what we call Calvinists, okay, all the way around the world. And no, this was something that was wrong. But what was different now was with the pill, you still would have the external integrity of marital relations appearing intact. There are no barriers that are being manipulated or put between you and your lovemaking, the pill kind of hides that. But the inner reality remains the same. What you're doing is you're frustrating the natural end of this act from its fruition. This caused a great deal of discussion and dispute and anguish within the church. And so although Pope Paul removed consideration of the birth control issue from the Second Vatican Council, reserving it to himself, there were 3 years of delay while he was making a decision. During those 3 years of delay, there was a great deal of confusion because the pro-birth control dynamic, the pro-birth control advocates in the church, without being stopped from teaching this new doctrine, okay, it spread more and more because it was obviously popular. Everybody always likes the easy way out. I remember in the old story, you might remember from the Bells of St. Mary's, when Father O'Malley comes to the schoolyard. He says, Ingrid Bergman, the Mother Superior, said, "Children, I want to introduce you to our new pastor, Father O'Malley." And he says, "Today's a free day, kids. Everybody go home," okay? And everybody cheers, okay? The nun says, "Well, wait a minute. Now we're going to have to make this free day up somewhere." "Oh, sister, don't worry about it. We live for free days," okay? So whenever you say, "Hey, it's a free day. Let's take the easy way out," everybody's going to be happy about it. And in the absence of this direction, dissent becomes normative, okay? Without anybody saying, no, the church's teaching still holds. No, and here's why. Those people preaching against the traditional teaching, as enunciated by Pius XI and Pius XII earlier, become, the church is changing, and this is one of the areas where it's going to change. Well, in 1968, he finally does come out, and he issues Humanae Vitae, reaffirming the historic teaching of Christendom on this point. And he makes a point, he says here, in preserving intact the whole moral law of marriage, the Church is convinced that she is contributing to the creation of a truly human civilization. And in one of the statements that Pope Paul made at the time of the issuance of Humanae Vitae, he said essentially something to this effect, that if the entire teaching of the Church on the linkage, the necessary linkage between love and life and marriage is broken, if the Church was wrong on all of that, it doesn't hold any keys at all. If it doesn't have the key to this, if what we taught for 1968 years was wrong, well, then the whole thing is wrong. So we can't change in something like this that affects really every person in the world. It created a gigantic storm of dissent. And those of us who are old enough, Joe and me, and maybe Dennis, maybe you, to remember 1968, it was a furious dissent that was fed again by the media, and it created a great deal of controversy. But there were a number of very prominent Catholics, it turned out to be famous Catholics, that said, "Holy Father, Paul VI, you are absolutely right. Thank you for reaffirming the Church's teaching because it's necessary." Who were some of these guys? You didn't hear much about them at the time, but they're pretty big names. The biggest one in the United States that held a seat was Patrick Cardinal O'Boyle of Washington, who tried to enforce the teaching of the doctrine in his diocese without a lot of success, but he tried. Bishop Fulton Sheen, okay. Bishop Fulton Sheen, during even the Second Vatican Council, was one of the people that affirmed, okay, that the Church can't go back on this. I mean, the entire theology of marriage and the entire theology of life, goes down the drain. Dietrich von Hildebrand, famous anti-Nazi thinker, famous Catholic thinker, convert to Catholicism. He also, foursquare, and boldly and with his own enthusiasm, which was considerable, defended the doctrine in every way that he could. And a famous, up-and-coming, rising, dynamic, young cardinal bishop, archbishop of Krakow, Karol Wojtyła, okay, of Poland, wrote a magnificent series, both of articles and essays, and actually they were later compiled into a book defending the teaching. And St. Pio, Padre Pio of Pietrelcina, okay, he died in 1968. One of his last public acts was writing to Pope Paul VI, and you were right, stick to your, he said it in much more elegant, holy terms than that, but you were absolutely right, thank you for, and St. Jose Maria Escrivá, people said, hey, you're so with it, I mean, you're all talking about this laity, why, if you came and opposed this reactionary policy, it would carry a lot of weight, and I think you make a real name for yourself throughout the world. Opus Dei would go all throughout the world. St. Jose Maria said, there's the door, get out. I support the Pope and I support the doctrine. Now, unfortunately, during this period of drift, other than these thinkers, there really was a failure to enforce or support the doctrine. Cardinal Boyle, although he disciplined priests who spoke against it, was not supported, by anyone, by Rome or anyone else. They kind of got scared of the great reaction that took place. And there was established what was called the Peace of 1968. Okay, yes, okay, you've reaffirmed the doctrine, everybody knows it, but as far as doing anything about it, just let the doctrine carry itself. Don't worry about trying to kick anybody out if they're teaching the other way. And so it allowed the situation to drift further. And so there became a practical moratorium on doctrinal discipline, because if there was no discipline on this, there wasn't going to be much of discipline on anything. Okay, if you're not going to tell people, wait, this is wrong, you're not being a Catholic if you do this, well then why should you distinguish between this and some other area that was subject to reinterpretation? And during these 10 years, the discipline of the church really went down, and also the acceptance of a lot more candidates that would have been rejected, say, in earlier years, became the norm. So there was confusion, great deal of confusion, and anarchy in seminary studies. Unlike the Council of Trent, which said, these are the things that you have to study. We want everybody to have a couple of years of philosophy. We want this kind of theology to be taught. We want the fathers of the church to be read. We want St. Augustine. We want Thomas Aquinas is going to the main thing. No, now it was up for grabs. And so depending on who the bishop was, or who the diocese was, or who the seminary was, you could see anything there. And again, growing up in that area, some of the stuff was incredibly bizarre that people came up with. But it was thought to be a freedom thing and a way of experimentation, and it really created a great deal of deformation and lack of formation in the clergy, and a lot of confusion in the laity. Once on all issues, not just the birth control, but on everything. Like the meaning of the Eucharist, the divinity, the practical divinity of Christ, and a lot of things. The bodily resurrection of Christ. Come on, you can't dispute that. I mean, it's as basic a thing as they come, but people did, and they did it with relative impunity. And the way was, okay, what the lingua franca at the time was, well, let's help people psychologies. Okay, let's look at it sociologically. Let's take this grace and this divinity stuff, this divinization that the fathers of the church talked about. This is kind of pie in the sky. What they really mean is psychology. I'm okay, you're okay, and how do we get everybody okay? How do we do that? And that became largely predominant in a lot of the seminaries. For example, in 1970, 71, the American National Council of Catholic Bishops published a study on the priesthood. What does the priesthood mean? Okay, and they came all with the most non-spiritual, community leader type of analysis that you can possibly imagine. The thing died a dead letter. Again, Fulton Sheen called it a colossal waste of money. Okay, but it was all this psychology and sociology running amok, because it was there's no doctrinal anchor on any of this. So whatever somebody comes up with, they come up with competing things. It doesn't even matter. They don't even care that it's competing. Now, what were the results of this? Gary Wills published a book called Bare Ruined Choirs, taking from a Shakespearean sonnet, talking about the monasteries that were destroyed in England at the time. Before Henry VIII, he had this whole network of monasteries providing all kinds of both religious and social services to the people. And once they were all nationalized and taken over, there was just a bunch of ruins lying around. And Gary Wills, who also went kind of a little goofy during this period and stayed goofy, I mean, wrote this book that, look at this, doubt, prophecy, and radical religion. So there was an evaporation of the Catholic identity. Before you knew what it meant to be, what it was to be a Catholic. You were taught, what it was. These are the teachings of the Church. What is the act of faith? I believe these are all the teachings which the Holy Catholic Church teaches, because you have revealed them, who can neither deceive nor be deceived. Okay, it was objective, it was clear cut. But suddenly, there was now they didn't know what it meant. So Catholic identity pretty much degenerated into a kind of just a historic ethnic affiliation of some kind. Oh, I'm Italian, so I'm a Catholic, or I'm Irish, so I'm a Catholic. But the content wasn't there, and that's, nothing. And with that evaporation of Catholic identity came an unraveling of Catholic loyalty. My grandfather, who was no scholar and had not a second grade education, said, hey, we've been Catholic over 2,000 years and never changed, never. Okay, well, when you don't even know what it means to be a Catholic, I mean, that kind of loyalty isn't there anymore. There was a great diminution of Catholic religious practice. We go a downward slope, okay, from 77% of American Catholics, 77 to 78% of American Catholics practicing in 1963, within 10 short years, that plummeted, to first 50%, and then it kept on going from there. A radical secularization of Catholic moral practice. According to statistics, Catholics had a different and much stronger and tighter adherence to traditional sexual morality than did others, okay, the other religious groups in the country. That changed rapidly to being just like everybody else. And there was a depopulation of the seminaries. We had 2 minor seminaries here in Chicago. High school kids would go to become priests and go into the major seminary in Mundelein. I mean, all of that, evaporated into nothingness, and seminaries like the Maynooth, okay, in Ireland, okay, went from being jam-packed waiting list, chock full, to, down to, just a handful of people. And of course, there's also demoralization. When you don't know what to believe, like Shakespeare said, if, the bugler sounds an uncertain trumpet, who will follow? So here's an example picture of it. This is a thriving parish. I don't know how well you can see it, I think. But before, the 60s, St. Agnes here in Detroit was a beautiful church, and thriving. And afterwards, it's a bare ruined choir. But, it's funny, with all the hubbub and all the, anxiety and the antagonism that Humanae Vitae engendered, he made a number of predictions in Humanae Vitae, and all of them came true. He said, if this is accepted, if contraception becomes the norm, we're going to have an increase in marital infidelity. We're going to have a general lowering of moral standards, a loss of respect for women, and coercive governmental intervention in citizens' reproductive lives. Because if it's no longer something sacred, something that nobody can interfere with, okay, it's only subject to God, well then, if the government wants to regulate it, they're going to regulate it. Every single one came through. And at the time they said, oh, this is ridiculous. Oh, he's just, he's, panicking, he's just, being a banshee, making a banshee cry. There's nothing to do. Well, every single thing came true. And it was to a degree that is actually frightening to the degree it keeps. Well, with this gigantic uproar that's going on, where the church is extremely demoralized. By the way, in 1975, right here in Chicago, Chicago Magazine published a survey, what will the world be like 25 years from now, in the year 2000? One of the questions, they had 2 pages of questions. Will there be this? Will there be that? one of the questions, will there still be a Catholic Church? It was a serious question. The church was, having so many people leaving the priesthood, so many nuns leaving, so many Catholics, no longer practicing. They wondered, will it still exist? Horrible media coverage. They said, well, 40% thought no. Okay. Well, in 1978, Pope Paul goes on to his eternal reward, and the conclave assembles to elect a new pope. And the big surprise was a pope from behind the Iron Curtain, Karol Wojtyła, that young, dynamic theologian, the priest, would roll up his sleeves and go on canoe trips, with the young members of his flock, teaching them theology while he was doing it, not just having fun, but also teaching them about Christ and about union with Christ too. He becomes elected pope, and an amazing, amazing man. I'm a big fan of his. Okay, he's called John Paul the Great, and I think that is I think that name will stick in history, and I think that's what he was. Just a few things that were characteristics of John Paul. He was a true believer. I mean, he did not think he had to reinvent or reimagine Christ. He wanted to get to know him. He had absolute confidence in God and the Catholic faith. He said, this is the truth. I mean, we're going to follow it. This is what's going to lead us all to heaven, and not only to heaven, but it's going to make a vision of heaven be able to be realized to a degree here on earth. He believed in Vatican II as proclaimed by John the 23rd. He was very much involved in writing some of the pivotal documents of Vatican II. He had a lot of interventions in the Second Vatican. Brilliant, brilliant guy, easy to talk to, high level, very poetic. He wanted that eternal doctrine, but presented in new and attractive ways. The commies were ruling his country. The commies were indoctrinating the people. He said, hey, we're good. They've got all the bells and whistles. We got nothing, but we got Jesus Christ. And with Jesus Christ, we can beat any bell and whistle, because he's God, he's incarnate goodness, and he's right, and we'll show it. And he's brilliant and poetic. Brilliant, genius guy. Okay. By the way, one of the contributions of John Paul, the body of work that he made during his 28 years of Pope is amazing. He rewrote on everything from theology of work to devotion to St. Joseph, and everything you can think of. I mean, it can be found in the writings of St. John Paul, and on a very high and important level, magnificent and very comprehensive, deep document on the Holy Spirit, which is a real brick to read, but it's got a lot of impact. And his slogan was always, "Be not afraid." Be not afraid, because God is real and God will transform. God leads. Christ reigns, Christ rules, Christ commands. And Christ is the good shepherd who lays down his life for the sheep, who knows the sheep and loves them. Be not afraid. We've got a Father that will take care of us. Be not afraid. And our Lord said, if you have faith that's the size of a mustard seed, you can move mountains. Well, he had faith, and what were some of the things that he did? Let's take a look.
Then there was this incredible moment when John Paul said those words that changed the world, that were the first domino that started the chain reaction of the fall of communism.
Niech wstąpi duch Twój. Niech wstąpi duch Twój i odnowi oblicze ziemi tej ziemi.
There was no way that you could contest Soviet power by force. It had to be contested by spiritual power, and he did it.
What John Paul II inspired was the conviction, I'm not going to live that way anymore. And out of that transformative revolution of conscience came the Solidarity movement.
John Paul II understood that men and women live and die for great ideas, and therefore he was essential to this dramatic new birth of freedom.
He did what people thought couldn't be done. He did it in many different places and in many different ways, but always also the same way. Opening wide the doors of your heart to Jesus Christ. That's what he believed in. He didn't want to reimagine Jesus Christ. He wanted to follow Jesus Christ. He wanted to teach others to follow him and love him. And he did. And even right here, you can keep that right, right here in the USA, they said, okay, maybe he can get away with that kind of tough talk, okay, telling young people that they have to obey the 6th and 9th commandment, okay, in Poland, okay, or in Spain, because he started these World Youth Days. The youth is falling away, we got to go back and get them, okay, let's have a World Youth Day. And he had it in Spain, and hundreds of thousands of people showed up. But then he decided, let's do it in the United States. They say he can't do it. America's not going to take that. You know, that might be fine for people with an ancient Catholic tradition, but not in the United States. We're way more advanced than that. Oh, yeah?
After his visit to the Rocky Mountains, he returned to Denver for an evening service at Mile High Stadium, and it was one of the sublime moments of his entire visit as 90,000 cheering young people went on and on and on in their celebration of the Pope.
Just hearing the roar when the helicopters started to come in carrying Pope John Paul, the pressure of the noise against the helicopters themselves, it jolted the helicopters a couple times.
When he came into Mile High, it was an amazing moment. There was this feeling in there of being overwhelmed by something people hadn't felt before.
We are in Denver. We are in Denver. Denver, Colorado.
All eyes are on this one guy. You catch a glimpse of him and you cry, and it's just this, it's the reaction to holiness. It was awesome, and it was just to be with that many other people.
I mean, the place was packed. It was a wholly different motivation for being there and a wholly different feeling. Nobody had gone into Mile High Stadium for this reason. People hadn't seen before, they hadn't experienced that before in Denver.
He did not back off a single one of the church doctrines, okay? You name birth control, fornication, you know, whatever. He gave the traditional teaching. People were amazed that someone could do this and have people cheering. He impacted a lot of lives.
You know, it's August. The sun was beating down.
It was long. 13 miles is a long pilgrimage for anyone to make.
It was a pilgrimage, and it was hard. You know, there are many challenges on a pilgrimage. Even if it's through the city, there were just people everywhere. It was an arduous but beautiful experience.
So we got up very early in the morning, and we began walking. And I remember more and more people were walking with us, wanting to share the same experience, faith experience, and wanting to have an encounter with God, because at the end, really, this is what we were all seeking. And the experience was really beautiful, to encounter young people from all over the world.
People started showing up, you know, overnight. There was a pilgrimage, the walk out there. And prior to the Pope getting there, you see this in third world countries, you see this sometimes at pilgrimages to religious sites, but you had priests who were sitting in chairs, and you had a person, a penitent, sitting next to them, and they were hearing confessions. And you saw this all over the park, and it was an amazing, pretty amazing sight, because in the United States you hardly ever see that. Then you saw people who you know, had camped out, you know, disheveled people getting out of their, you know, at dawn, getting out of their sleeping bags.
It's like the Catholic Woodstock, you know. It was just this enormous mass of humanity.
Crowds were estimated at well over 800,000 there. Some even said there were close to 1 million, but it was just amazing to see that kind of mass of people.
It was very orderly, people were enjoying themselves, almost like a Sunday picnic, but you know, with 800,000 people.
And it was crazy because you had every age from everywhere. I saw everybody. I saw a cross-section of ages, a cross-section of cultures, and everybody's got the one thing in common, is we all love JP2, and a lot of them are only in that moment discovering how much they love JP2. So a lot of people were having a real moment.
it did change my life. I remember one distinct moment in which he was speaking, and he began to say that it was necessary, urgent, to go and announce the love of God to everyone.
And the mission of proclaiming it to the ends of the earth is now passing to your generation.
And I remember in that moment, clearly and distinctly, I began to think about my life and see that everything that I was doing didn't have really a deep meaning. And in that moment, the words of the Holy Father really struck my heart.
Have no fear. Have no fear.
And in that moment, I also felt for the first time a strong call from God to become a priest. And little did I know that eventually I would have been ordained priest for the Archdiocese of Denver. So it all started with John Paul II in 1993, and that experience is still present in my life. I cannot detach myself from that World Youth Day.
For a lot of people, it was a conversion moment, and you can talk to so many priests who can trace their priesthood, their vocation, back to World Youth Day.
World Youth Day produced fruit here, and certainly the Holy Father himself said he was even surprised by the response of the people here and the young people here. And he considered it a revolution.
Well, he did that all over the world, okay, and he didn't use any kind of gimmick. He didn't have any kind of, bell or whistle that, was new or reimagined, It's Jesus Christ, our Lord, the same, yesterday and today, the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega. By his wounds, holy and glorious, we're saved. And that's and he demands, he is a king. And a king we follow him. We don't pretend we play pin the tail on the donkey with him, okay? No, we follow him, okay? Because he alone knows the way of eternal life. What were the results of this pontificate? Reaffirmation of Catholic doctrine in all its beauty and all its subtlety, yet with a more contemporary idiom. Okay, the council, the Catechism of the Catholic Church is our definitive reference. Okay, it's different in the sense of its language, in the sense of its formulation, than say than the Council of the Catechism of the Council of Trent. Nothing's changed, okay, the same doctrines are there, but expressed in a language and an idiom that people understand, but it's without change. Just the way John the 23rd said, reestablishment of Catholic identity. Once again, people knew what it meant to be a Catholic. Now we got it, it's clear. It's in the Catholic Catechism, it's represented, or it's embodied by Pope John Paul, who loves this stuff and loves Christ. But, and with that Catholic identity, ecumenists are more healthy than ever, because once we get closer to Christ, we get closer to our separated brethren, because again, as he said so well, Jesus Christ knows what's inside every man. He alone knows it. The closer we get to him, the closer we get to everyone, the more we see what we really do have in common. Again, like Pope John the 23rd, having seen heroism on the part of people like Dietrich Bonhoeffer and the part of other people who were helping out the persecuted during World War II. Yes, they're doing it because of Jesus Christ. Corrie ten Boom and others, okay? This is now, when we get closer to Christ, we're capable because Christ makes us into heroes and heroines. More results of his growth of new apostolates. All kinds of lay apostolates came around. Things like focus, things like there's a lot of the Ascension Press, different things came about. Ignatius Press, all came about inspired by John Paul's new reaffirmation of the centrality of Jesus Christ and the truth of the Catholic faith. Rekindling of devotions. He's restarted back again in Rome, Corpus Christi processions to Our Lady. Pilgrimages to all the Catholic sites began to go up to great degrees again because he was doing it. He was in favor of it. He modeled it. People followed it. They got enriched and blessed by it. Marian renewal, divine mercy became very popular. He was a devotee of St. Faustina, canonized her, and the Divine Mercy devotion, which she so well articulated and postulated. He spread that. And Eucharistic adoration. Before John Paul became Pope, I hadn't seen Eucharistic adoration outside of a few places that I frequent, like Center of Opus Dei, for years, okay? But he popularized it. Eucharistic shrines became all over the world. Increase of vocations. All kinds of people now saying, okay, now I know what a priest is supposed to be like. Somebody like John Paul, that's the father. That's the kind of person that I want to be. That's the way I want to follow Christ. And same thing with new orders of nuns. A collapse of the Soviet Empire, we saw that. And even in Russia, you know, there began the Soviet Empire, communism fell even in Russia. And so it was restored religious life. Well, what are the lessons from this crisis 7? Okay, we start off, we get way down, almost like a Frank Capra movie. You know, he takes you way down before he lifts you back up. Well, we went way down, okay, in the 60s and 70s, and we came way back up. One, Satan never sleeps. You know, what we talked about in the beginning, okay, that war of the evil one against the power and the potency of the Christian message, the birth of the Christian life. Okay, he's going to be opposing every step of the way. No matter who we got, no matter who's the Pope, or no matter what country we're in, we're always going to have some opposition. This eternal war will always go on. You know, it's par for the course. We have to be ready for it. And on different fronts. You know, if Satan sees he's not succeeding in one place, he's going to look for another. And only Satan cannot be defeated by just coming up with some new modern jingle, singing "Kumbaya" will drive the devil away, and won't do it. Okay, only the strong one, Jesus Christ Himself, can defeat the devil, because the devil is superior, of course, in intellect and as a mode of being to all of us. Okay, we're powerless to stand against him, but Jesus Christ, who's God, makes the devil look like a flea. Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. And there's no improvement over incarnate goodness. You know, you don't do better than Jesus Christ. You know, you don't come up with a better theory or idea than the Son of God. Okay, He's the one that we have to follow. He's the one that, you know, if He's the way, the truth, and the life, we have to follow Him. And if we follow Him, we find our destiny and we find our happiness. And the other end of it is the separation from His teaching always fails. People thinking they're being relevant, okay, and taking away the teaching of Christ, watering it down or backing away from it. Look what happened. Bare ruined choirs, empty churches, and far worse than that, as we're seeing now. Union with Him will always bring life and resurrection. I have come that they have life, and have it more abundantly. And even if should He die, Jesus and His faith and His church will always rise again. This is a picture of Ukraine, a religious procession in Ukraine now in the 2000s, okay? There are hundreds of thousands of people in an area where the children were indoctrinated from kindergarten on that there is no God. And now, here they are carrying an icon of the Blessed Virgin Mary, led by a lot of young Orthodox priests through the streets of Kiev, you know, where there was no religious demonstration at all. This is not 1865, okay? This is now. Nothing is impossible with God. These, I think, are the lessons that we have to always remember. It's not just a matter of belonging to a worldwide organization. It's not just a matter of belonging to something with a lot of beautiful traditions. It's something. It's the adventure of God incarnate in the world, living continually in the world through the Catholic faith, with its teaching and its morals. It's always going to be difficult, but if we follow it, you know, not only do we find ourselves, he who seeks his life will lose it. He who loses his life for my sake will find it. This is, I think this is the answer that we all have. No matter what inaction or action takes place with people with higher authority than ours, we nevertheless have the ability to be one of these people. And what we should do is support those that are trying to bring, to keep the Catholic faith going. That's one of the reasons why we have these talks here. Here at St. Mary of the Angels, we are committed to the teaching of the Catholic Church. We are committed to Jesus Christ in all his fullness. And we would love to have you join us. We're not giving up. I mean, we're going to start trying to convert people. We have people coming into RCA more than ever, more than any other church practically in the Archdiocese of Chicago. So, but we want to do. It's not enough. Okay, there's too many people falling away. We want to get more. And if you can be here to help us, we would really need you, and you will, not only you save a soul and you save your own. You get the confidence once again when we try to bring Jesus Christ into the hearts and lives of others, because then we're living in the love that never fails. That love that is with the heart of Jesus Christ is not only what makes the world go round, which gives us light, happiness, and joy. And that's the goal that I think we have here, and I hope that you join us in it. Thank you.